And we are live. How we doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and that is Licata, that many of you guys know from SNY, among many other things. And tonight, we're going to be breaking down what is next for this Metropolitan Club. As we know, the Mets have pitchers and catchers just about a week away now from reporting. Some guys are already attending. We're all excited and anxious to get the season going. But are the Mets going to have any more moves up their sleeve? We're going to break down the latest regarding guys like Tarik Skubal, Framber Valdez, also now going to the Detroit Tigers, our immediate reactions to that, along with everything else in Mets land between potential fits for this team, maybe guys that make more sense than others. How do we like the lab configuration? How do we like everything that David Stearns has done to this point, or lack thereof, is what we're going to deep dive in this one. But folks, make sure to smash that like and subscribe on your way in, as it's a fantastic way to support the platform. And let me know your thoughts.
You got to tell me, because obviously I started my own YouTube thing and the podcast. You guys all say to smash that like button. Why not just touch the like button? Why is it got to be smashed? It's
like, gotta hammer, smash that button. I think just the adamancy that you got to do it now and you got to do it fast. Okay, so that's what I got for you. But yeah, we're very happy to have you in the YouTube game. This has been long overdue to have you here on the platform. I was very grateful for the time that you had me on WFAN in the past, not too long ago, and that was a fun segment. And a lot has happened in Metsland since then. I would say that's an understatement. So without further ado, let's just hop right into the cell, and then at the end of the show, we'll answer some comments from the live viewers, should they have them. Also, everybody, help us get to 38,000 subscribers. We'll be giving away a brand new Mets jersey of either Freddie Peralta or Bo Bichette, depending on when exactly we hit that, and it will be to one lucky subscriber. And shout out to our sponsors tonight at SeatGeek that have you covered for all of your ticketing needs. Just use our promo code WARDY10. Again, that is WARDY10 for 10% off your next ticket purchase, whether that's for Super Bowl Sunday, hockey tickets, NBA, concerts, comedies, UFC, you name it. All things ticketing. Check out our awesome friends down there, as well as Sleeper with promo code HMA. That way, you two get a 100% deposit match up to $100 on your first deposit for all things in sports fantasy. Now, Sal, let's start off by breaking down your initial thoughts and reactions to what has been a crazy offseason for David Stearns of the Mets. It started off really frustrating. It's looked a lot better as of late. I would love to know your overall evaluation of the club to this point and all the moves they've done.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, they needed to change the core. I've been saying that for a long time. Regardless of what popular opinion is or what the fans say, I've known 2024, they give you some hope. All right, you know what? Let's see what could happen in 2025. And then after watching last year, definitively to me, they needed to change the core. It's not easy to do. That's why I give Stearns credit for doing it, knowing he was going to face backlash. But they trade. That's something I talked about last year, whether it be on the fan or whatever other platforms I was on, trading Nimmo. And, it can't happen. Well, it shows you could trade anybody. Everybody's got a price one way or another. Nimmo, even if they weren't actively looking to do it, they did it. And that was the first kind of domino to fall. Letting Pete go, we know what happened. I think the Diaz thing was a mistake, which sucks because they don't have much wiggle room for mistakes. But I love that they changed the entire infrastructure of, as I believe are going to be better, well-rounded ball players and more gamers, which I think this team has lacked in recent years.
Yes, I love the emphasis on gamers, because that's something that I feel like the Mets have lacked, to your point. And this is not to purposely slight, one of the guys, whether it's McNeil, Nimmo, Alonso, the aspects of the score, but the type of element that they brought to their game definitely wasn't necessarily exactly what this Mets team has needed over the years. It's great individual success, but when looking at how has this meshed together, you can make the rightful argument that it most certainly hasn't. And I think this past season was a prime example of exactly that. So bringing in high character individuals like Marcus Semien, the captain of the Texas Rangers, who's notorious for doing the team meetups among many other things. We saw him already hanging out a couple weeks ago at Baylor University with guys like Jet Williams before he was traded, and Brett Beatty getting some infield work in, just showing you the type of leader that he is. Freddie Peralta, the Mets brought in, is apparently notorious for always hosting his teammates after a day game at his place. So hopefully that transition continues now with the Mets, and we see something along those lines. And then you think of guys like Jorge Polanco, which I'm sure is going to be great both on and off the field. Bo Bichette brings a winning mentality after getting so close this past season. And right before you know it, the Mets have themselves a nice structured team where you didn't maybe think that they were going to get as good as they've now gotten after parting ways with literally their entire core, Edwin Diaz included. I know that's a move that David Stearns didn't want to see happen, but at the same time, with the exception of losing Diaz, I don't really think you could fault too much on what Stearns has been able to get done at this point.
Two things. Core, check, get an ace. So those two things, it doesn't mean they're going to win the World Series, doesn't mean they're going to win the division or make the playoffs, but those were, to me, bare minimum necessities going into this offseason. They did that. You don't need 15 different stars, but you do need star players. And they have that in Lindor and Soto. So now, how do you complement those stars? That's the trick to building a team. They've gotten better defensively, more well rounded, better balance up and down that lineup, better pitching staff with Peralta. I think the bullpen's deeper. We'll see how Williams does in comparison to Edwin Diaz. But I like this team. And we know they're going to make upgrades. They'll make upgrades in season as needed. That's something that they've done under Cohen and Stern. So I like this team going into the season.
Well, I like this team too, but I'm usually one of those fans that's more in the I want at least one or two more pieces. Because when I look at the structure of this roster right now, I see a lot of good, but I'm also saying to myself, the Mets are really serious about contending this year. You know you have to do more than maybe what you thought you needed to do because you have the LA Dodgers right in front of you. You know, when you have something that big of a dragon that you're trying to slay, the only way to make that happen is by getting more in the Dodgers category. Now, things are out of the Mets' control when it comes to certain player pursuits. We understand that. Kyle Tucker got offered 60 plus million a year from the Mets, and a more lucrative contract offer was not to, the same way that so many other players, Diaz included, went to the Dodgers. So when I think about the Dodgers and I think about them being a threat, I'm automatically thinking of what the future is going to hold for one Tarik Skubal, because we have seen the Dodgers continue to be connected to him as a potential fit either through trade or next offseason, and the Mets, of course, have been in the thick of that as well. We saw a lot of drama happen with Tarik over the past week leading up to his arbitration hearing. He was at $32 million. The Tigers were at an absurd $19 for the back-to-back Cy Young Award winner. And in the end, which isn't really surprising, but is a monumental deal for the players and their union, is seeing Tarik Skubal comfortably win this arbitration hearing. You know, he's the first pitcher to get over $20 million in arbitration hearing in MLB history. So this is a massive deal. And the Tigers just invested $38 million a year for at minimum the next 2 seasons for Framber Valdez to have some type of cushion. So my question to you, Sal, is what's your thoughts on the Tarik Skubal situation? And do you think it's in the best interest of the Tigers to trade him now or try to ride it out and see if you can actually win it all with him in 2026?
I think the Tigers are morons for not trading him now. Every day that they hold on to him, they're losing value. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's an obvious, easy thing to say, especially after this. But no chance. The one thing that we can all agree on is there is zero chance Skubal is going to be back with the Tigers. So that leaves a window of one season for the Tigers to decide, are we going to go try to win a World Series or maximize our return? It's on that. They really should keep him and extend him. But since they're not doing that, the only alternative to me that makes any sense is to try to maximize your return now, realistically, because the teams, the reports that were the Tigers, one of the, half the teams, whether it was the Yankees or Mets or whoever. So here's my prediction. He won't be a Tiger, certainly after this year. I think they're going to trade him at the trade deadline anyway. But when all's said and done, his long-term home is going to be the Mets. I said that tonight on Baseball Night in New York, and I believe it. See, the difference is, in this case, like you referenced Tucker, or you could talk about Yamamoto or Diaz, wanted the most money. I know some of them got that, ended up getting that anyway with the Dodgers. But if you want the most money, Skubal's agent is Boris, much like Juan Soto. If Skubal wants the most money, he's going to be a Met. And because his agent is Boris, that would make me think he wants the most money. Therefore, I have him with the Mets, not the Dodgers. So I don't know what's going to happen at the deadline. I think the Tigers would be foolish if they don't move him. But ultimately, if he hits free agency, which he will, I think he's going to be a Met.
Sal, you're to hold on to him. Just for the simple reason alone, you're going to lose him for, at most, you're getting is a draft pick. Like, how could you do that? How could you comprehend such a thing? On top of it all, I don't understand the thought process behind, okay, we have a 7-WAR pitcher that would literally give us the best return of a trade imaginable in this offseason right now, but let's go ahead and hold on to him, risk injury, and if you do see him get injured, then he's not getting traded. And then again, your thought process that you may have had all along is that we're going to look to be competitive leading in the trade deadline. We're going to maximize the return for Skubal then to still have it be maybe a win-for-win thing. Maybe we add more offense and add a bit more security on the rotation, even though you're losing your front-lining guy. Because, listen, in a very David Stearns way of going about it, if, say, it was roles reversed and this was a Brewers organization with Stearns where they had to trade Skubal because they couldn't pay the dollars. If you're smart like David, you would look at the 7-WAR that you have in an individual player and you would think, okay, how can I get that value back or even higher upside of value? And that means by spreading the wealth on multiple assets, whether that's top prospects mixed with guys who are MLB ready or some established players that have yet to take that next step in their game. I can go on talking about how silly it is for Detroit not to trade him. But I think what you and I have both collectively agreed is that it is not going to happen this offseason, and it's likely going to happen if it is going to happen, at the trade deadline. So to be determined, it wouldn't be the first time that we saw the Tigers trade what was a quality asset and still make a playoff push. 2 years ago, they traded Jack Flaherty to LA, traded Marcano away to the San Francisco Giants. Then they casually had a fantastic second half and made playoffs and surprised their entire fan base. And they're more established now than ever with their young core group. And they bring in Valdez, who has a great relationship and rapport with AJ Hinch already during their time in Houston. I just don't see how it is in the best interest, again, the organization to move forward in that kind of direction when you do have teams like the Mets, and as much as I don't wish to say it, the Dodgers, among others, that have the abundance of assets to make it happen. Now, if Skubal does not get traded, and let's say we're in offseason from now, lockout stuff is happening. Who knows when we're going to play again in 2027. But Tarik Skubal is that big piece. He's looking for $400 million. The Mets will have to get so creative in their pitch for him because while they may present the most money, what we have sadly learned continuously, each of the past two off seasons especially, is that having the most money and offering the most money doesn't guarantee anything. And that's why it's so imperative that the Mets find some semblance of success here in 2026. It starts with the culture, goes with the vibes, and then obviously you're looking for the actual on-field product of winning baseball games and not 13 games below 500 from like June 13th on for the remainder of the season, which I still can't comprehend it. I covered every single one of those games. I know you did as well, Sal. And before we deep dive more into this, I just got to ask you from, a talking head point of view, how grueling was it having to go up there every single week, trying to spin, trying to suggest that would be something different, when in reality, the writing was on the wall for such an extended period of time of what the status of the club was in 2025?
This is something I've done for a long time. This year was not as bad as you're making it sound. Like, it wasn't good, obviously, but think about the years that it used to be. Like, I don't know how old you are or what you started following the Mets, but I started, just give you an example. I started at SNY in 2010. Look at the Mets record, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14. So, like, when you watch those teams, they had no shot going in, and then during the year it was even worse than that a lot of those years. So still, sadly, win an awful year for the team or the franchise the way you look at it. And watching Soto every day, that was fun. But yeah, this season was torture because of the higher expectations. So that part I understand, but I'll take that and at least competitiveness and extending to the final day of the year and the frustration. I'll take that over the 2010 to 14, and then post 16 years again until 2022, really.
That's fair. If we're going to talk about the bar, it's all the way very deep in the ocean when it comes to Mets success versus lack thereof, right? For context for me, I've been a Mets fan my whole life. I turned 26 this year, but my fandom has really only been at its strength for the past 11 to 12 years now, I would say. It really sparked up in the 2015 season because before that, I was a Mets fan, but I was more casual. I was a lot more locked in with hockey. I'm a Rangers fan. I'm surprisingly a Steelers fan for football. So those were more of my main focuses at a younger age. And then halfway through that season, it was fate. And here's why, Sal. My cousin was like, and I was hanging out with him because I'm originally from Long Island, but I've resided in Pennsylvania most of my life. So I'm in New York for the weekend to spend time with my family. My cousin Blaze looks at me and says, Tyler, we should watch this series this weekend for the Mets. I'm like, okay, sure. But like, is there a specific reason why? And he says, yeah, if the Mets beat the Nationals, they're going to be first in the division for the first time in forever. And that was right in the heart of the Wilmer Flores drama, Brittany and Yoenis Cespedes and the run. It could not have been better for someone like myself to get locked back in. Since then, it's been a lot of disappointment, but the 2024 season was electric. That was a lot of fun to cover. And hopefully, I really do have a feeling that 2026 is going to be a lot of fun as well for this Mets team. So to talk more about the 2026 Mets, my next question to you, Sal, is the following. If the Mets do land another starter this offseason, do you prefer that it's someone, say, via trade that maybe is a bit younger with higher upside, which is why we're seeing the rumblings going on with the Pittsburgh Pirates from Will Salmon among others as of late? Or do you have more of a preference that the Mets should go after more of a grizzled veteran out there, whether that is, say, a reunion of a Chris Bassett or a Jose Quintana, or going down the lengths of a higher upside pitcher, but you have to give up draft pick compensation, which you don't love, and a Zach Gallen, who is an East Coast native? What's your thoughts?
Of those names, I'd rather have Gallen. I don't. First of all, I don't think it matters. I don't think the Mets they have plenty of depth right now. So, do they need more depth, or do they need a higher end guy? For me, it would be the latter. I would be looking for the higher end guy. So where is that? Does Stearns trust that it's one of the younger pitchers in Pittsburgh potentially? Maybe if he thinks that that's the case, then so be it. I like Zach Gallen myself. I would not touch Chris Bassett at all. Quintana's fine, but again, those are depth guys. I think the Mets are fine in that area. So I wouldn't be looking to go waste money on that now. I'd let the season develop, see what happens here, what you get from McLean, obviously what you expect to get from Peralta. Are you going to get a bounce back from Mania, Senga? What are those guys going to do? Is Holmes going to take another step forward, giving you some length in that rotation? What's Peterson going to give you? They have plenty of options. Hey, you could go into the minors if you need to with Tong. So they want to see how it plays out. And then at the deadline, see what you need. And if you feel like you need a horse at the front end and there's somebody available, maybe it's Skubal, obviously, maybe it's not, maybe it's somebody else, then go all in for that. I don't think that it's necessary to make that move right now. Certainly after they got Peralta, I think that they're fine. But if I had to pick one of those guys, it would be Zach Gallen.
That's fair. You know, for me, for the longest time, I was heavily advocating for Framber Valdez because you really felt like that exception. A guy that's available in the market, yes, but you're getting a guy that's going to give you north of 200 innings every single season, has ace caliber upside, has been front manning a rotation in Houston for years. Him, along with McLean and Peralta, would be as good of a 1-2-3 as you could find. So to see that not come to fruition was disappointing, mainly from the sense of all he costed you was dollars, and he had an opt-out after the second season. But I do understand that sometimes it's a bit more out of the Mets' control, even if they had heavy interest, which I don't believe that they did as much as we hope. But I do know that that A.J. Hinch connection probably rang true as the deciding factor to a degree versus maybe Framber going elsewhere with maybe a little bit more guaranteed dollars. But knowing that he was off the board over the past 24 hours, you're right. There are many guys out there that I think check off the box of warranting why you would go out your way to not only acquire that pitcher, but also part ways with one of your starters in the process. Because, you know, as Salmon has reiterated constantly this offseason, the Mets are going to add a starter. They're likely going to have to subtract, whether that is a Sean Manaea somehow, a David Pearson the final year of his contract, a Kodai Senga, who had a lot of talk in the beginning of the offseason, maybe someone of a Christian Scott or Jonathan caliber if the Mets maybe found a more of a need-for-need win-win situation. There are various ways to go about it, but you know, for me, Sal, as much as I look at the depth of this team and I see at least 8 quality starters at the moment, and that's good, the quantity over quality is still absolutely screaming at me as someone who has seen this continued trend in years past, where even when the Mets on paper have had a very good looking deep rotation, bam, 2 guys are down in spring training with injury like it's no problem. And I'm not just referring to Manaea and Montas. I'm referring to every single year one of the Mets' top pitchers goes down in the beginning of the season. It's pretty much a lock to happen. So God willing it doesn't, but I'm fully anticipating something to happen to one of these guys. And when that inevitably happens, the Mets are then going to be in a very similar position as they have in years past, where you could sit on your hands, not make a move, and then if the dominoes continue to fall one by one, then you put yourself in a tough spot, and here's why. As much as there is an appealing aspect to going after starters at the traded line, my main gripe and counter as to why I think you should still pay now, even if it's a slight premium in the offseason, is because these teams are going to be asking for a Cane's ransom at the trade deadline more than likely. You know, the Luis Robert trade talks, for example, absolutely absurd for what they were asking versus what the Mets ultimately got him for by taking on that salary. You think of why didn't the Mets land a starter at this past year's trade deadline? It's because, as David Stearns said himself, the asking prices were just astronomical. So, okay, how many starters did we see get traded this past deadline, Sal? Outside of like Merrill Kelly, no one for the most part. And that is my big concern. I don't want the Mets to put themselves in a position where they're banking so much on in-house options when, lo and behold, it's the same story yet again this time of year, if that makes sense.
All right. So what would you do?
So what I would do if I was in David Stearns' shoes right now is you already didn't bring in Framber Valdez. So out of the free agents available, do I think any are justifiable to bring in and trade a starter? I honestly don't think so. I think Zach Gallen can provide you the innings potentially, but there is some major concern with regression for him and now handling the big market, which he's never dealt before. Even with him being an East Coast native.
My point is, of all those guys that you mentioned,
right, and
saying what you want the Mets to do, none of those guys. Like, you could bring in Gallen, you could trade for Pittsburgh arm, or you could bring, like, it's still in the same spot as they would be anyway. They're not needle movers.
Well, here's what I will say. It's the Twins. Yeah. The Twins is the one team where I've been most interested and intrigued by all offseason because they too feel like an organization that is going to do just enough to make their fans buy tickets to start the season and then have nothing to show by the time they do get to the deadline. Pop in my mind, or Sandy Alcantara from the Marlins, because Peter Bendix traded Jesus Luzardo in the division last year to the Phillies. Why can't he do it again this time around? That's the kind of way that I'm thinking, because those guys would all be needle movers and would be upgrades over a Peterson, a Manaea, a Senga, and floor versus ceiling, in my opinion.
Right, but then why couldn't you just do that in season?
And that goes back to my concern is, what if the asking price is just absurd then, where you don't even really get a chance to, because they're asking for literally an arm and a leg and then some? That's my only counter I have.
At some point, you have to pay the price.
Right.
If you feel like it's a difference-making last year, obviously, was not the right time to do that. It wouldn't have made a big difference. So this year, if things play out that way, that they need one of those top arms and those guys are still available, and you would think that they would be if those teams are bad and they were dangled out there anyway, then maybe that's when the Mets go on and go over the top. Maybe it is Skubal. I mean, you don't know. So I just don't think you need to do that now. You could get guys at the deadline. I don't care how many were moved or weren't moved a year ago. You could get guys. You may just have to pay the premium. And if that's the case, you got to do it. So be it.
Right. I think it's more so on just finding out if David Stearns is going to step up this time around, right? Because the first 2 years with him at the helm for the Mets, he has been very underwhelming at the trade deadline, and it goes beyond him. I mean, Billy Eppler was the same thing. Like, Daniel Vogelback's your big piece at the deadline when you need more consistent oomph in your lineup. When we go back to even, it's kind of crazy how Zach Scott's tenure with the Mets is, I would say, the most notable in a trade deadline acquisition. Even though that they didn't land Chris Bryant that year, they brought in a Javi Baez, who, say what you will about the thumbs down, I understand that perception with the fan base. He was still tremendous down the stretch. Trevor Williams was a valuable piece for them. The Mets really haven't done a whole lot since then. So it's more so on my skepticism of what Stearns will do or lack thereof when talking about the deadline. But to your point, yes, I do think that the Mets are going to have to pay that premium, and now's the time to do so if they have to.
Did you have an issue last year at the trade deadline? Like, I know how the results were, but last year at the deadline, you didn't think the Mets did enough?
So my reaction last year at the deadline was I thought Cedric Mullins was way too underwhelming of a player, mainly because I had the major concern that a lot of people did was that he wouldn't transition to the big market in Flushing, Queens, right? You look at Gregory Soto, was great to start, and then he fell off, but you knew there was risk there. Tyler Rogers was as advertised. That was awesome. But when you look at, again, the lack of adding a starter, Stearns will say, well, no one was really, justifiable enough to give up the assets. I say, okay. My biggest problem with Stearns from this past season, I'm a David Stearns truther. Most people say that I go to bat for him, and times I even shouldn't still. I've been very frustrated with the Mets the past year, naturally, like most fans. But my biggest problem I had with him this past year, and I want to know if you feel the same or different, is that I truly felt that he sat on his hands way too long when it came to addressing the rotation in any way, shape, or form. From the time that Senga went down mid-June with injury, to then Griffin Canny rupturing his Achilles, to Tyler McGill going down with injury, you had Frankie Montas doing a full month's worth of rehab, looking terrible, and lo and behold, he was more of that before he went down with his reconstructed Tommy John surgery. Sean Manaea, setback, comes back, and he doesn't look good, and you find out he has a loose body in his elbow. Like, literally anything and everything imaginable that could have went wrong for the Mets rotation from a health standpoint last year went wrong, and then the guys that were healthy and David Pearson couldn't handle the workload of having the most innings he's ever had in his career in the second half. You saw him very fatigued. Clay Holmes was your most reliable starter when he's a guy that you were just banking on to give you a saw amount of innings in 2025. So knowing that they didn't be more proactive, and especially calling up Noah McLean, that's my biggest gripe, because I was following McLean all season long. He had a good amount of stretch in Syracuse, which I think would have justified him being moved up as much as a month sooner. They had their reasons, especially given contract status and, burning the first year of their deal versus not. I get it, but at the same time, I think the Mets risked too much because then they bit off more than they could chew. And by the time we got to trade deadline and post-trade deadline, they're banking on kids as certainties for them to help them down the stretch because they were getting no help elsewhere. That's something where I think of David Stearns' not postseason, but after the season comments, he stated how he could be a bit more proactive and not as conservative with his in-season decision-making. And that right there was the main thing that stuck out like a sore thumb for me when looking at the rotation. What's your thoughts?
Right, but you went over a million different reasons there, which to me proves the point of there wasn't a move that he could have made that would have changed the result.
That's fair. Okay.
Noah McLean could not have been better than he was. And guess what? It wasn't good enough. Pitching down the stretch wasn't the problem. The team wasn't good. So his issue was going into the year with that rotation. But when you lose Canning, when Montas sucks, and we all knew that, and he gets hurt anyway, when Manaea is doing what he does, when Senga goes down the way he did, it's over. Like there wasn't a move. They could have brought in Alcantara or whoever you want to. It wasn't changing anything. They could have brought McLean up sooner. Wasn't going to change anything. The team just didn't have it. So I would knock Stearns for building the rotation that he did going into the year. I don't think that there were moves available at the deadline that the Mets could have made to get them over the hump. And that will probably ring true again this year. It's generally based on how you build the club going in and then needing to put the finishing touches on your team at the trade deadline. If the guys that he has right now don't get the job done, there's not going to be a savior out there at the deadline that's going to all of a sudden turn the season around. It's got to come from the majority of it has got to come from the group that he's assembled here, and then you complement it with a trade or two at the trade deadline.
Oh, absolutely. There's no denying that when we started last season, they began with a rotation that had a lot of question marks. You know, the ceiling looked very solid, but the floor was, okay, you have multiple guys that are going to struggle to go deep into ball games. And then as the year went on with Senga, it went from a guy who looked like he was your ace to not even a pitcher you could have at the major league level. Like, the fact that that happens in one calendar season when he was the guy that you were banking on most is as Metsian as they come, unfortunately. So to see that unravel in real time, you know, I agree with you. It took more than one move at the deadline to get the Mets rotation right. That isn't how I was trying to word it. So if I did come off that way, I apologize. I mean it more in the sense of the Mets had a greater opportunity where they knew for a month and a half at minimum before the trade deadline that they had a massive rotation issue that wasn't going to just quickly fix itself. And their lack of either being proactive to maybe pay for a premium for a starter before the deadline. I understand it's uncommon, but in hindsight, it's something that the Mets should have probably done. Doing that, pairing with considering calling up one of your young guns to see what they have. Because, listen, as bad as the Mets were from mid-June on last year, and they were absolutely horrendous, what's also true is that they still missed playoffs by the final game of the season. So you have to view it from that lens, because if the Mets do, say, squeak into playoffs and have a level of success, you know, for me, I think of Edwin Diaz, and and maybe I'm delusional. I mean, not maybe. I think that's a rhetorical thing. I'm aware I'm delusional. But it really feels like Edwin Diaz probably would have stayed a Met if the Mets had some semblance of a playoff run this past year, where it gave it more of a reasoning to be like, okay, this team is positioning themselves to have continued success. Diaz only had one competent playoff run in like 7 years in the organization. If you have the Dodgers knocking on your door, giving you exactly what you're looking for, how can you say no?
I don't think it had anything to do with the fact that the Mets didn't make the playoffs with Diaz. I mean, if the Mets gave him more money up front, I think it just had to do with the way the Dodgers were courting him, the relationship with the agent and the Dodgers GM or president or whatever there, versus the way that Stearns was handling it. That's the way that I think. Diaz signed here with the Mets, you know, in worse circumstances before. So if he wanted to just win, he could have left sooner than that. I also thought he was going to get a lot more money than he got. But look, I think it comes down to this, really. Do you trust Stearns or not? I do. I trust David Stearns. I think that right now, to me, I would rather have this version of the New York Mets than any point in their franchise history, with the owner being who he is and the president being who he is. I trust that for the first time ever, this team is going to have sustained success. Now, it hasn't happened, and that's the most important thing. The results have to be there. But look at the history, look at the now, to where I think it's a good thing that even in a horrific year, they missed the playoffs by a game. That used to be like a good season for the Mets. So I have full trust in Cohen, and I have trust, maybe not full trust, but enough trust in Stearns to see this through. Whereas I can see if maybe you don't or others don't, they have to go out there and prove themselves. But I'm good with where the Mets organization's at right now.
Yeah, trust is built quicker when it comes to having sustained success than anything else, right? Because when we first bought into Steve Cohen becoming owner, we gave him essentially that 3 to 5 year window. We understood that winning a championship wasn't easy, but when you have the owner basically say nonchalant, you know, I expect one in this time frame, naturally you're going to build some level of expectation with the fan base. And as each year has went on, we have seen continued turmoil, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that David Stearns was Cohen's guy from the literal start, and he wasn't able to get him until year 3. Think about how different this team would look if David Stearns was the president from day one. It would be so much more hands-on with what he's built and what he's developed than anything else, which is why this turmoil, while it's drastic, isn't overly surprising, not just because of the lack of success the Mets have had with this core group, but also that these aren't Stearns' guys. The same exact thing can be said when you look at the prospects. That's why he didn't lose sleep trading Drew Gilbert and a deal for Tyler Rogers with Blade Tidwell. The same thing with Luis Angel Acuna for Robert, spending $40+ million on a guy with a not even 700 OPS each of the past 2 seasons. I do have a level of faith in David Stearns, but like most fans, my faith will be contingent as to how does he react when it is time to do so. Because what I have seen has been a lack of proper reaction in times where I feel it's been warranted. Whether it has been maybe we're giving a bit too much flack to Mendoza for the lack of bullpen success, when in reality, it's not his fault that the Mets are throwing the most pitchers in any organization's history in one single season the way that the Mets did last year. So he just needs to prove it, but I have confidence that he will, because as we know, having both an owner and a president that are diehard fans is a very unique circumstance that very few fan bases have the luxury of going through. And Cohen cares, Stearns cares, and I'm sure there have been many moments where behind the scenes they've been losing their mind, really pissed off because they are genuinely fans. So I'm going to continue with that belief, and honestly, again, I look at this team, I like it. I don't have an issue with it. I just naturally want to add more because I know inevitably you're going to need to do more if you're going to get over that hump. At least that's what the expectation is as of now. And should the Mets do anything else this offseason, Sal, I'm just going to ask you point blank. Are there any players out there that entice you to a certain degree, whether they're just guys that will help fill out the roster as role players, maybe someone that really sticks out like a sore thumb to help frontline the rotation, a clear bat to add in the slot, maybe a nice bullpen piece? If you had to pick some players today to round out this roster, who are the first that come to mind?
I want another outfielder just as insurance for Carson Benge. So Randall Grichuk comes to mind. I don't love the idea of Marte being a primary outfielder, but I do love the idea of bringing Marte back, if not anything but his relationship with Soto. I think that that's important to keep Soto comfortable. Plus, Marte I think he can still hit and be a productive player and maybe play a little bit of left field, just a little more insurance than Brett Beatty alone as the regular left fielder. If look at 2 guys like that, like Tommy Pham's another name that intrigues me, but you probably move on from him at his age. I just like his toughness and mental attitude, all those different things, plus a right-handed bat, familiar with New York. But Grichuk and Marte are the 2 guys. Look, obviously there are some other guys. We mentioned Gallen before. I don't think any of those moves are necessary. I would, though, like to see the Mets just complete the roster with one more bat, outfield bat, preferably right-handed, as insurance for Carson Benge.
I'm with you in the sense of an outfield bat. I feel like that's inevitable. I think that's very realistic. When I had Will on the platform a couple weeks ago, this is before anything went public, and he said, basically my expectation is that the Mets will add a platoon outfielder. So whether that's Starling Marte, who I do think the Mets are going to bring back. Something tells me the Mets are going to bring back Starling Marte, but still figure out by adding another player that plays both the infield and the outfield. I think that they're going to land someone that's very versatile, that isn't overly flashy, but again, brings you more insurance, especially if there is at all a world where you do trade a Brett Beatty or a Mark Vientos before the season starts. Because I don't think the Mets are going to roll into the season with Vientos, Beatty, and Mauricio all in the organization. Maybe I'm going to be proven wrong, but that still feels like a ticking time bomb waiting to happen where the Mets are going to make change there because they still have an abundance of riches, and you don't want to hurt the trade value of guys that you're going to give less and less playing time to, which right now it feels like Mark Vientos is going to get less and less opportunity, even with their uncertainty at first base. And speaking of first base, I think that would be a good area for the Mets. I know that they've been in the market for a very defensively sound first baseman in Ty France, who would help shore up, I think, give you a bit more certainty with Jorge Polanco, especially if he comes in later in the game as a replacement. And he had a level of success last year, especially down the stretch with the Blue Jays and their World Series run. Outfielders outside of Marte that I like. He's a lefty, but he played with Luis Robert, and he gets on base really, really well, and that is Mike Tauchman. Tauchman's been around for a bit, and what I like most about him is that he knows his role. He's not a guy where it's like a Harrison Bader situation in 2024 where we saw a level of drama with Bader after getting less playing time to Tyrone Taylor, and he didn't necessarily take it well, at least from what was reported through the New York Post. Tauchman has been in a limited platoon the past couple of years for the White Sox, so he would come in seamlessly to handle that position and bring more of a veteran leadership for someone like Benge as he's getting his feet wet. And I like Carson Benge a lot. I'm really bullish on him. I do think he'll be the Mets' main left field option next season. I think it won't take long for him to prove his worth. But regarding Carson Benge, though, what are you most enticed by with a player profile like him versus what is your largest concern outside of, simply inexperience?
The only concern is inexperience. And I love the idea that the Mets built the team this way. I think it takes a combination of veterans, star players, role players, also needing some room for the young guys to grow. So the fact that you could plug right Robert and put him in center field. You get a legit veteran center fielder out there at the very least defensively. You know what the infield is. Why not have a spot that you can create for a young player that you have high expectations for and believe he can go out there and win the job? There's this thought process like, oh, well, no, you have to have everything plugged in. Like, go get Bellinger on top. Why not have Bellinger left? No, no, no. You need room to grow. He's going to have a great opportunity. The question is, will he be able to take advantage of it? I don't care what his numbers are in the minor leagues or how he profiles. He's actually got to do it. So he's going to have an opportunity to go out there and earn it in spring training. And then if he does, then he's going to have to do it at the big league level. Because if he doesn't get the job done, even if he wins it in spring training, if he doesn't get the job done, he'll be sent back down. The Mets have shown accountability in the organization since David Stearns has been here. So I hope that he takes this opportunity and goes out there and doesn't relinquish it, doesn't have to look back and go down to the minors. I have no idea if that's going to happen or not, but I love the fact that the Mets are building the team like this, planning for Benge to take over and be the everyday left fielder where he can be a high impact bat, and also doing it where you're doing it where he's not. Remember, Michael Conforto in 2015, when fans were calling to have him up, it was out of desperation. The Mets needed some offense. Oh my God, Conforto. And it was necessity. Now, he thrived when he first came up, which is why we fell in love with him. Obviously, he turned into a bust after that. But with Benge, he's going to come in nicely here. No pressure at all. He's going to hit lower in the lineup, probably an eighth or ninth, and be the every to get acclimated to the big leagues, specifically in New York with no pressure. So I think it's the perfect spot to properly develop a player, highly have him develop into a successful major leaguer.
There is a glaring difference between being in the Will Ponds regime when it comes to previous ownership and where the Mets had a lot of not nearly as high-ranking prospects get opportunity at times because they just need to plug holes, whereas the Mets purposely positioned their offseason, as you just alluded to, as David Stearns spearheaded, making sure there was an opportunity and an opening for him. And you don't do that unless you're really confident in Benge's abilities. And as someone who literally watched every step of the way for him last year from start to finish, where this guy skyrocketed through 3 different minor league teams, got better every single time, had a slight setback when he first got to Syracuse due to injury, but then he picked it up towards the end of the season as well. He perfectly transitioned every single place he was at. I saw him in person. He looked tremendous too. Carson Benge has that it factor, and there's a reason why he's one of the best outfield prospects in baseball. And when you look at, the past outfield prospects that the Mets have, cut loose with maybe prematurely, whether it's a Drew Gilbert or to the greatest degree right now, a Pete Armstrong, or what should have been a great talent, but unfortunately for his sake was just asked to be the savior too soon in Seattle, that being and a guy like Mr. Kelenic. This feels like the Mets finally now have an opportunity with the top outfield prospect that they're not going to part with, and is going to be the homegrown talent that we've been longing for. And how funny is it that pretty much a decade removed from Brandon Nimmo making his MLB debut, the Mets look like they're on the cusp of replacing Nimmo with another homegrown outfield talent. So hopefully the passing of the torch is going to be seamless that we see in the 2026 season with Benge. But yeah, I'm excited about him, and knowing that the Mets have a lot of confidence in him makes it reassuring that this will hopefully be the step in the right direction for how their lineup and their outfield is going to look. Well, to talk a little bit more on this team, I want to ask you about the pitching for a second, specifically Christian Scott, Jonah Tong. These are two major upside young pitchers in the organization. Tong led all AA in strikeouts, all minor leagues for that matter in strikeouts this past season. And then you have Christian Scott, who, before he went down with his reconstructed Tommy John surgery, was putting up minor league numbers that were only trailing Paul Skeens leading into his MLB debut. And he did that with the partially torn UCL. So as both these guys are fully locked and loaded and ready to go for the 2026 season, who do you think is going to have a greater impact and why?
I feel Christian Scott has a presence. When I watched him the first time when he came up a couple years ago, similar to the way that I did maybe not just like Harvey. Harvey was a different animal when he first came up, but you could see his presence. And I was like, wow, okay, this guy's got something here. So, and maybe the numbers don't show that or back that up. And obviously he got hurt here. People were excited about Jonah Tong. I was excited about Tong and seeing what he could do at the big league level. He didn't have the presence. And he's a young kid and he acted as such. I'm not like just knocking him for crying, but you're a big leaguer. This is New York. Nobody's saying it's easy, but you want to be in the big leagues. You need to have the right mentality as well. So Tong may have the stuff. and I'm not ready to just give up on him. But if I had to pick one of the two, I would say Christian Scott because of the stuff and the presence that he showed when he first came up. And I think he's only going to learn from that. And then obviously being out with the injury, I would expect, again, is he going to be maybe not that high, but I would expect big things for Christian Scott as at the very least a number three, a solid big leaguer as a number three in a rotation.
Yeah, Scott feels like the guy that's going to be first at the Mets use for everything when it comes to potential rotation issues, right? Because if you look at the profile between himself and Jonathan, and I don't want Christian to take this at all the wrong way if he ever hears or sees this, but I think the Mets are more willing to put Christian Scott in various circumstances right from the jump versus what they might do with Jonah. I think with Jonah, they're going to play things a bit more smart. They're going to be a bit more careful with him to begin the season, whereas they've already gotten a taste of Christian Scott having more success at the big league level, and we know that he's fully healthy for the first time in like 2.5, 3 years now. Take advantage of that. See how much innings you can get out of him this year when it needs to be called upon, because the Mets have the luxury of not needing him for success with a guy like Tobias Myers, who's this perfect swayman option. I really like that pickup along with Peralta. Very underrated in what the Mets got there. But Scott brings an element which is unique because you not only have the minor league options, but you have a guy whose fastball really plays up, very deceptive for his size. It has a lot of late ride to it, and it's going to surprise people. We'll sit 95, but you're thinking it's 98 with the way that's going to rise up. So there are appealing aspects of Scott and what he brings to the table for this rotation. I just think the Mets have more of an appetite to use him again, whether it's as a starter or just as, the extra starter for a doubleheader, or in the case of needing a multi-innings eater, and maybe Tobias Myers can't get that job done for you. So yes, I agree with you. I think Scott will have a greater impact this year, but who knows? Maybe Jonathan will have the more impressive impact between the two, even if it's in a smaller sample size. To be determined on that front. Well, Sal, I really don't got much for you before we get out of here, so I'll just have this be a two-parter if it's okay with you. One, I'm going to ask you, again, your thoughts about this lineup heading into the season. What are you most confident in about not only the lineup of the roster? What are you most least confident in? And then to wrap up the show, I figured we'll just answer some questions from the people in the live chat. How's that sound?
Yeah, it sounds good. I'm most confident in, well, I mean, obviously Juan Soto. The thing that I'm looking forward, though, to seeing outside of the confidence in Soto and Lindor, to a lesser extent, but still Lindor, the balance. I think these guys are going to put the game hard. They're going to play the game the right way. It's not going to be one prolific power hitter outside of Soto. It's going to be a bunch of guys that can hit 20 homers, or guys that can step up there and be a threat to hit the ball out of the ballpark, whether it's Alvarez down in the order, Beatty, Robert, Simeon. I think the Mets have, obviously, Bo Bichette and Lindor and Soto could do that. I'm talking about the length and depth. Polanco. I think the Mets are going to have a much deeper lineup, and 1 through 9 should be much more difficult to navigate through than the last couple of teams that we've seen, even the successful team in 2024, where there were some outs toward the bottom of that order. So the balance that they have along with the star power. Really, other than like Alvarez has got to reach his full potential, what is Simeon going to be? I really have full confidence that this line is going to be better than it was a year ago. I don't have any real glaring concerns. And I do think that you're going to see them make the proper moves that they need to enhance the lineup.
I agree in the sense that I think the depth of this lineup now, the floor versus the ceiling, is in a much greater position, right? Because by bringing in someone like Robert and him casually being currently maybe your number 7 hitter is tremendous when you look at the upside there. I understand that he's coming off of down seasons. I also know he had an over 800 OPS in the second half. He killed against lefties. He's a tremendous defender, elite base running, and he's someone that I've wanted on the Mets for years, and I was in attendance for the only home run he's ever hit at Citi Field, just like Bo Bichette, funny enough. So I'm happy to see these guys actually in Queens now. And, the offensive upside that you see with a guy like Bo Bichette, I don't think can be understated. Like, everything is in line for, even with how great of an offense Bo had, going back to this 2021 season with the Blue Jays, where Simeon had over 40 home runs for them that year. Then he cashed in big to become the Texas Rangers captain. This Mets lineup to have a guy like Bichette batting behind Soto, I don't know if fans really understand just how immense that's going to be, because Alonso was the home run hitter, the guy to drive in a lot of runs. Naturally, that is true. But Bichette's approach at the plate is and WRC Plus per Fangraphs when looking at having runners on base. Like, that's just a steady thing for him. He's just that good. And knowing that he's going to probably sit for north of a 300 average while giving you 20 home runs and north of 100 RBIs, the Mets are going to have so many runs coming in. And then I think of the other aspects of the lineup. Jorge Polanco. I think he may have a bit of an adjustment handling New York for the first time, but understanding that this is a batter coming off of a season and what's a pitcher's park in Seattle with an 800 OPS or higher from both sides of the play is very impressive. He raked against Tarik Skubal in the playoffs last year. He's the reason why the Mariners had their magical playoff run, because he walked them off and got them into the postseason, everything else in between. So that kind of clutch performer, the clutchness about this slap is what I'm most excited about, Sal, because Marcus Semien doesn't strike out much, right? Luis Robert does, but even when he's in that box, as well as putting the ball in play just constantly. And I think we're going to find out real quick, wow, this lineup is very different, but in the best way possible. More versatility, greater floor versus ceiling. And while the Mets maybe aren't going to be top 5 in home runs next season the way that they were this past year, home runs mean jack if that's all you have. And that was for great stretches all this Mets offense had when they were trying to find consistent success in the 2025 season. My big concern for them, like any other year, pitching's going to fall apart somehow. Guys are going to go down with injury. The bullpen's going to be overworked in tax. You're going to miss at least one big bat in your lineup. Something's going to happen. Things inevitably happen this season. So those are my rightful concerns, but I don't think they're anything different than I have heading into any Mets season, for that matter. So with that being said, everybody, let's get to a couple remarks, and then we'll wrap this one up. If you guys have specific questions that you would like Sal and I to answer, or just Sal, please make sure to ask, and then we will go on from there, everybody. Let's go up in the chat here. We got some people in the chat. We got Levin, great member. How are you? JTB, thank you so much for chiming in. Pat White, the roughly 700 you tonight. Continue smashing that like and subscribe on. And yes, we're saying smash Sal because I can't think of a different word or phrase to go about it. It rolls off the tongue. We got a lot of you guys in here. And yes, we will be doing a members only live stream soon, everybody. I owe you that big time from this past month at minimum. Pat White, great member. I know my guy Dave Kaplitz is in here as well. All you guys chiming in, appreciate you guys greatly. And again, if you have a specific comment for you guys, for Sal, let's hear it. JTB, how we doing? He says, Sal, are we confident in our bullpen with Devin Williams as the closer? Good question.
Yes, I think that the bullpen is deeper than it was going into the year. Last year, I think I think Williams is going to bounce back sort of what he was in Milwaukee than what he was with the Yankees. The fact that he could go through a season like that in New York, lose the closer's job twice, and still finish as strongly as he did the final 19 games or so to be lights out. I don't know how dominant he's going to be. I think he'll be much better than he was with the Yankees and one of the better closers in all of baseball.
Yeah, Devin Williams is like far from a concern for me. I think the only concern I have personally is just the fact that he's not Edwin Diaz. And Diaz was such a lock, even when he made you nervous. It was like he almost like was purposely thriving when he walked a guy to get on base, or he did a hit by batter, whatever the case was. So I'm going to miss that aspect of having a wild card a couple years ago. Devin is not giving that up for a home run pretty much ever. So I'm excited to see him getting a full year in New York now with the Mets. That's the big thing that a lot of Yankees fans just can't comprehend. They're like, oh, you always want these Yankee has-beens. I'm like, no. It's not our fault that they had a trial run with you. It's because he was getting his living situation in order. You know, he was trying to figure out how to navigate just going to games for the first time. He's not used to being in New York. You know, believe it or not, guys coming from small-town Milwaukee don't necessarily have the greatest adjustment right away at the big league level for the Mets or for the Yankees. So Devin getting that taste only helped him, and now I'm excited to see him paired back yet again with the same David Stearns who traded Josh Hader away to give Devin the keys as their closer a couple years ago. Let's see what else we got in the chat, everybody. Let's go. Let's see. SR, how we doing? A great member. We also got our guy Alvin, great member of the chat. How are you? Steve, great member. Fred Perez, all you guys. I see the following. Wardy, do you think the ABS system is going to make a huge difference for hitters and pitchers? That's a fun question as well. I've been looking forward to the ABS system. I wish that you didn't have a limitation in the amount of times you could challenge, just because I think if the challenges are really warranted, it's not going to be, exhausted. I don't think it's going to be exacerbating the amount of times that a team would use it in a game where it's to the point of being malicious. But I am excited for the ABS system. I do think it's going to make a difference because we have seen live in real time every single season. There are games that are dictated in the end by one or two calls. Not that there weren't blown calls earlier in the game, but it's the fact that there are high-pressure cooker situations where we have seen umpires just completely miss the mark. And now allowing a Juan Soto, allowing a Francisco Lindor, allowing a Bo Bichette to say, hey, give me a second, that was the wrong call, and you know they're going to nail it 9 times out of 10, I can't see how that's a bad thing. What's your thoughts, Sal?
I don't think it's going to be impactful enough.
Okay.
It's either got to be all the time or not at all. It doesn't make any sense. Put it this way. people will still be bitching and moaning about the strike calls. Simple as that.
Of course, yes, that goes without saying. That's fair. Next question we got here. Let's see. We need a number 3 starter quality lefty. That would have been Framber Valdez, but the Detroit Tigers said we're gonna just pick you right up, so that isn't happening. Let's see here. Thomas Kim in the chat says, Sal, if there would be a trade in any of the Mets players currently, who do you think it would be for and for whom? If you just had to think of it on the fly.
Wait, that players that I would want the Mets to trade, or if there were to be a trade?
If there were to be a trade, who could you see the Mets trading and for what?
I'd probably say Vientos. Vientos from the major leagues, maybe from the minor leagues, and I would say for a pitcher. And then they'd probably trade one of the pitchers for something else, a position player.
And who was the
But
player?
I would think
Sorry, who was the player you said from the minor leagues?
like Mauricio,
Okay.
somebody like that. Like, I would, from the big leagues right now, if there's one player that I would expect to be traded, or if that I would think would be the favorite to be traded, would be Vientos. I don't think they want to trade Beatty. I just think Beatty's got more value. So the one that they might be more willing to part with would be Vientos. I think there's probably a little smoke to that Pirates stuff. I don't know how legit it is to make multiple trades before the season. Maybe that's something that happens more in season. But right now, if I had to pick a guy, I think it's Vientos. Otherwise, I think the roster's pretty much set.
Yeah, the Pirate stuff is interesting just because it's like, is this actively happening right now? Will said yesterday that it is, but he kind of threw cold water as to like if he thinks the Pirates will reach the asking price of what the Mets are looking for there. It's interesting because Joel Sherman of the New York Post reported over the past 2 weeks how the Mets have steadily been in the market with the Pirates for specifically their young pitching. So it wasn't shocking to see this kind of, reestablished throughout the media yesterday, as we all talked about respectively. But it is interesting because the Pirates are in dire need of a third base profile, which Beatty would obviously fill the void of. Vientos, while he wouldn't be defensively sound, would still get runway in a way that he's not going to have with the Mets this year. And that's why I just think it makes too much sense to trademark when he doesn't have any minor league options left. He basically told you at the trade deadline that he wasn't necessarily happy with how things were going. He didn't really think that there was anyone to turn to help him figure out his game, kind of felt alone. Like, to hear those remarks right before a deadline happens and then you don't trade that player, and then he breaks out in August for a couple weeks and then he's non-existent the rest of the year. It just didn't work for Mark Vientos in his sophomore year. But unfortunately for him, the Mets are in a position where they're not going to allow just this constant leash of an uncertainty. They will to a degree with Benge because they know the upside's there. But when Vientos' value is only present with the bat, and when that isn't there, you have nothing, that's where you have an issue. And it's the same exact reason why the Mets were never considering bringing Alonso back beyond a couple of years. So that was something that they stood firm on for a year and a half now. And I'd imagine that David Stearns will continue that philosophy. It's so important to have players on this roster that bring levels of defensive value. Even if it's just versatility, but they don't play any position great, at least you can play them. Mark Vientos, for as much as I love him, it's nothing personal, he is far from anything that the Mets could find themselves putting out there in the infield and feeling comfortable with. We got some remarks here. We said, Blindbeard says, I miss Sal BT on WFAN, as does everyone else here. I think that goes without saying. Thank you so much for the donation. We appreciate that. He also did say that when are you going bowling in Port St. Lucie? I'll be in Port St. Lucie towards the end of February. Sal, fun story about this guy, Blindbeard, a longtime follower of mine. He met up with me at spring training last year and actually at my Wardy Day, because I did an event at Citi Field last year with a group of followers, and that was a lot of fun. And he's shown up for all of them, essentially. And he is legally blind, where he legit can't see anything properly. And we're at Duffy's, because I did a live show there, and we're doing a bowling game after with the people that came out to watch the live segment I was doing. And apparently Blindbeard's like the most amazing bowler imaginable, even while he can't physically see. When I tell you this man had his head down the entire time, chucked a ball 30 plus miles per hour, and had a strike on his first throw, I wish I was lying. I'm not. That's exactly what happened. So we got the best in the business when it comes to bowling right here. Really, really cool. Last but not least, let's get to this from Drew in the chat, and then we're going to wrap it up, everybody. Let's say, and thank you so much for that. Let's get into this. Wardy and Sal, should we try to get Mike Vassell back? He had a 2-year his rookie year with the White Sox out of the bullpen. That's a fun name because Vassell is one of those few arms that since leaving the organization has had a level of success. I don't think the Mets need to go down that route. I think it's just more so on Vassell thriving in a less pressure cooker of a situation in a small market. What's your thoughts about that, Sal?
I wanted them to target last year at the trade deadline. So I wouldn't be opposed to it. But again, these are like ancillary pieces that I don't think are relevant now. I get that everybody wants more and you want to get as many moves as possible and load up going into the season. It's a long season. A lot of teams get in deadline, and then a name like that, if you need to add it, you go add them. So I wouldn't be opposed to it, and I don't think it's a necessity right now. I think I'm happy with this team. I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do for the first couple of months of the season, and then I'm looking even more forward to seeing what type of moves the Mets make to adjust ahead of the trade deadline.
Likewise. Final one here, because this was another question for you, Sal, from a donation, and then I'm just going to rapid fire answer the next couple because we have some more comments. Let's see. We see Tony, who's having a hard time comprehending that people will donate as a way to support and get their questions answered. Yes, Tony, this is your first time chiming in a live stream. Let me enlighten you. That's how things go here on YouTube. It might be your first time. That's okay. I'm here to help. Pat with a $5 holla says the following. Soren's is a pro, but Alvy's an embarrassment. Okay, let's pump the brakes here, all right? Alvy's not an embarrassment. You're talking out your ass. He was fantastic after getting called up. JPR and Sebia got him right, and now JP is our catching coach. I don't want to hear it. I'm pro Alvy. Sal, how do we acquire a close to MLB-ready catching prospect? Interesting question.
Can you say it again? You broke up there.
No worries.
How do you?
So he said basically because he's not an Alvarez fan, but he's pro Torrens.
Right.
How can the Mets go about acquiring an MLB-ready catching prospect?
No, I don't think they need one.
Exactly.
I think you do need to just give Alvarez at least this year. If he doesn't do well this year, then I'd be right there with you. Like I had it with d'Arnaud. I don't want to give him 16 years. It felt like the Mets were just waiting forever for d'Arnaud to reach his full potential, and he never did it here. Good luck. Get out of here. I don't care what you do with the Braves or elsewhere. Alvarez is better than that. He's got the right attitude, the right work ethic. He calls the good game. He's been hurt with some, unlucky injuries. You love his power bat. He showed some signs last year. Leave Alvarez alone. He should be fine. If he doesn't perform well this year, then I think you can start saying, hey, the Mets need to upgrade catcher going into the next season.
Right. And on top of it, Alvarez is only 24. Like, even if this was a year where there was flashes but not consistency, the Mets are still not giving up on him yet. Maybe they'll start to reevaluate as to if he's really their guy or not. Sure, that would make sense, but they're not just going to pull the plug that prematurely with the amount of value that he has. It just is insane. We all know Alvarez is still an anomaly. Literally, there are catchers that don't even make their debut until 25, 26, etc. And he's been the bigs for the past 3.5, 4 seasons now. Like, come on. I just think that's funny. Nick here, great member with the $2 holla. Beatty, Pearson, Vientos, and Morabito for Skeens. Whatever you're smoking, pass it here, because I wish it was that easy to get a trade done. It isn't going to happen, Nick. I apologize. But I like the way that you think. I would love a trade for Paul Skeens too, just not something that I anticipate happening in the near future. But guys and gals, that is going to do it for our live show. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. This was a fun one. Definitely the first of many segments I'm sure we'll be doing with Sal throughout the course of the season. Sal, thank you so much for your time this evening. I really appreciate the conversation. And any final remarks you'd like to share before we wrap this one up?
Yes, thanks for having me. Make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, download, whatever, wherever you get your podcast. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Make sure to check out Sal, everybody. If you guys haven't already, thank you so much for your continued support, and we'll